Okay.
All right. Go ahead and call this meeting to order. You do the roll call, Robin, please.
Okay, John Paul, oh, I'm sorry, Member Paul. Member Covey.
Here.
Member Sherman,
Here.
Member Rockwell,
Here.
Member Burlingwood. Here. Member Hanks is absent, Member Morse is absent, and Chair James.
Thank you. All right, now I would entertain a motion related to the agenda.
Move that we adopt the agenda.
Second? Second. Any discussion of the board? Comments from the public? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those nay. Passes unanimously. Next, entertain a motion on the minutes. Haley's feeling so moved.
I move that we approve the minutes from the before 13/23 meeting, UAV meeting.
Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion with the board? Discussion with the public? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those nay. Passes unanimously. State of the utility.
So, Mr. Chair, we have several topics, a couple topics that kind of came up toward the end of our last meeting that we're going to give brief updates on. One is related to the government services contribution. It's the old general fund transfer. And the question was asked at the April 13th General Policy Committee meeting. The City Commission adopted a new formula for that. And so Mark Benton, I believe, Mark is going to give us a kind of an overview of that tonight. Just a couple of slides that sort of give the high level of what that is made up of. And then if you all have any questions related to that, that'll be followed up by Mr. Hutchinson, our Chief Customer Officer, will give an update. There were some questions about the billing project that we just completed. It went live on April 3rd, sort of the status of that, and some of the metrics of success related to that. Mr. Hutchinson will give us an update on that. And then I wanted to address a brief topic on the integrated resource plan. So those are the three things I want to kind of give as an update going forward, but we'll start with Mr. Benton and the government services contribution formula.
So there were two of the central findings of the Auditor General's report that came out back in January 2022. Well, obviously, GRU debt levels were higher than other municipalities, and the second was that the City Commission didn't have a regimented formula for determining what the general fund transfer was going to be, and particularly didn't have a view of putting that formula together in terms of what was consistent with GRU's long-term ability to pay. So obviously those two pieces they're playing a big role as we develop the 24 budget. And so we worked with general government staff to come up with jointly, and that's a big point. We worked jointly to come up with a formula that we felt like could be repeatable, consistent, provide budgetary certainty, to both sides of the house, that the pieces could be verified independently. They're auditable. And so what I've done is I've just pulled a couple slides out of the presentation that we gave to the General Policy Committee on April 13th. We took it there for them to adopt the formula or not adopt it. And they did pass it. It'll go to the sitting as a city commission in the form of a resolution at their May 4th meeting to codify it. But basically, there's two pieces to the formula itself, and they're intended to represent proxies for what we would pay if we were an IOU in terms of property tax, and what we would pay in terms of a franchise fee. And what you've got up here is kind of the pieces of that. The property tax calculation component is going to use the GRU's total insured values. It's counted as 70% to represent a couple different things. Number one, because the insured values aren't, obviously, they're not a perfect match for what the assessed value might be if the property appraiser were doing that. And also the fact that some of that value falls outside the corporate city limits. And so they wouldn't be picking up property tax revenues from that if it were an IOU. The second piece is the franchise fee. And what we're going to use for that is 90% of electric system revenues, less fuel and rate stabilization transfers, times a 5% franchise fee. And we'll be able to we'll use audited results from the most recent prior audit, so we can point to the numbers on the income statement and say that that's where that number comes from. The total insured values will come out of the most recent property insurance policy that's overseen and administered by the Department of Risk Management in general government. It also provides for the fact that anything that I hesitate to use the word profit because some people are uneasy, but any of the profits, any money that we make that is not turned over in terms of that transfer will be used to accelerate the debt plan or provide equity for capital projects, because the more we pour into our internal equity, the less we'll have to borrow, and that'll help us mitigate our debt going forward. And that's consistent with the debt defeasance policy that's on the books now that was adopted as part of the amendment to the debt management policy back last October.
Are you going to go into more detail, or are you moving on?
I'm moving on.
So before we move on,
Okay, maybe I'm not moving on. No, go ahead.
John, you have a question?
What I take from this is you're representing, as if somebody else actually owned, what do you call it, the utility, and they're paying a franchise fee plus taxes.
That's absolutely correct. The debate about the general fund transfer and the level of general fund transfer has been going on since the mid-1980s. It's always been intended to represent a proxy for what an IOU would pay if that was the situation that we were in. It is generally three pieces: property tax, franchise fee, and a return to shareholders. Well, since we're taking all of the excess of what we earn over what we transfer and using that to pay debt, we translate that to a private company buying back their own stock instead of paying a dividend to the shareholders. So we believe we're consistent with the theory that we've always operated under, so what that transfer should represent.
But following on with that, what would be if you look at the county as being the owner, what would be the return to the owner? What percent? What, for example, what do you call it? An IOU would pay out to stockholders perhaps 2%. What do you call it, of their earnings? What do you call it, back to the stockholder? Does this finally get down to something like that?
Well, it does, but instead of that going back to the quote to the owner, to the city, it's going back into buying and into paying down our debt. So in other words, we look at it as the equivalent of, if a private company can do a couple things, like you mentioned, they can pay a dividend to the shareholders. They can do nothing if the year hasn't been good. But they can pay a dividend, or they can buy back their stock, which essentially makes the company more valuable. That's what we believe we're doing here. We're turning any of that excess back into accelerating the repayment of that.
Well, that would all be in retained earnings somewhere for those companies. But in the end, what do you call it? It's some return to the, what do you call it, to the city. And I'm just looking for that number. If I'm trying to compare it to an outside company that would actually.
Well, and it's going to vary, because there are going to be years where we, in fact, if you want to look at it that way, over the last, from 2003 to 2019, depending on the methodology that you look at, we paid out almost $48 million more than what we earned. So it's a little difficult to translate in that to a percentage of return. Under the prior formulas, when we look at these three pieces, you're probably looking at something around 3%.
Okay.
But hesitate to quantify it like that because there are many years where, like I said, we were actually paying more than we earned.
But it makes it more understandable to people that, you know, buy stock, what do you call it, and get some return. You as the city, what do you call it? Well, should get a return on your.
And what this number translates to, the actual, and we'll get to that on the next slide. This number translates to a dollar figure that's about $15 million. The general general fund budget is somewhere a little north of $150 million. So what we're doing is even in its reduced state, because this is about 50% of what it was before, it's still generating about 10% of their operating budget.
Good.
Can you expand on the franchise fee business? What is it? How is it determined?
We actually look at the audited electric system revenues. We back out fuel and we back out transfers to rate state from that number. Essentially we take 5% of that and then we apply a 90% number to that to discount at 10% because not all of those revenues are generated on properties inside the corporate limits.
Well, do other entities have to pay a franchise fee similarly?
They do, and when we looked at across the state, we looked at what other municipalities are paying, and the range was anywhere, and this is literally the way we did this, the range was between 3% and 7%, and we simply split it in the middle and took 5%. So yes, it's common for IOUs to pay franchise fees to cities in which they operate.
Yeah, Tim.
I was curious, the property insurance policy, does that cover the generating assets or is that just real estate?
You know, it covers the generating assets as well.
Everything GRU.
So I have a couple of questions. So first, the last thing you said, so you said something about that you took 90% of.
And 90%, take the electric system revenues, multiply those by 5%, and then you take 90% of that product.
So what was the 90%?
It's because not all those revenues are generated off properties that are inside the corporate limits.
So I don't understand the logic of that. I mean, it sounds like, this is GRU equipment though.
It's GRU equipment, but some of that equipment is located outside the corporate limits. What we're trying to do is we're trying to translate into what GRU, if it were a private entity, would be paying to the city. The city wouldn't be picking up that revenue for something that's done outside its corporate limits.
So why not? Why not? If I own a business and regardless where it's located.
Franchise, in essence, if you had a franchise fee, would go to the county.
You can't charge a franchise fee outside the.
Why are these numbers restricted to the electric system?
There, it's not, as Mr. Crow pointed out, it's typical to see an electric system franchise fee. It's not typical across the state of Florida, see water, wastewater. It's much less usual.
I understand, but a lot of utilities don't have that, but it sounds like what you've done is basically set that to a 0 for gas, water, wastewater, everything else.
Yeah, there's nothing applied against those other systems.
Am I correct? The other municipalities around here don't typically charge a franchise fee for their utilities on water either.
I don't think.
City of Alachua,
don't think
City of Archer, City of Hawthorne, they're all electric franchise fees.
But then they deliver the others,
Mhm.
and you said that they make no profits to the city off of any of their.
It's not on a franchise fee. I don't understand where the franchise fee changes, but I know I don't see that on the other bills from the.
Oh,
other
not on the bills, but in terms of.
And like I said, it's not typical for other municipalities, municipally owned utilities across the state to charge franchise fees on their water and wastewater system.
So an independently owned utility wouldn't charge? I mean, it seems like they wouldn't have a franchise fee on,
It's not common.
so they're making no profit then on the other
They're
utility?
they're not generating any revenue that they're paying to the municipality in which they operate.
Okay, so this isn't representing a profit of an IOU. This is saying if we brought in an IOU, what franchise?
Saying that if we were an IOU and we operated in the territory that we operate now, we'd be making that franchise fee payment to the entity in the geographical area we operate.
Okay, and just a second, a couple other questions. Will any of this carry, feel free not to answer this one, or if you don't know, carry forward to if, let's say, for example, there's an independent board that's now operating GRUs or anything, would this remain in place?
I have absolutely no idea.
But everything in this, any answer to that question has to do with a bill that's going to the House and the Senate and the governor to sign, but the language that's in there now. When I look at that and read it, it allows policies and procedures that are in place to continue until and if the board chooses to do something different. And then there is a section of the bill, so I would say it continues until that, if that happens. And then the other thing, there's language in the bill that does talk about this fee, that it wouldn't, it could operate like this with the language that's there. So the language in there doesn't restrict this any more than what it is currently.
And then last question, going back, you mentioned the IRP, so this is something that's come up between, because we're in a publicly noticed meeting, that Teresa and I are both on the IRP's public, whatever, the meeting that's coming up. We both can't, is that a publicly noticed meeting?
So it will not be a publicly noticed meeting.
So we both can't be there.
Correct. You cannot both be there. That was one of the topics I wanted to talk about today. So that those stakeholder meetings starting, both of you, since you're both on the UAB, cannot both be on there because we will be talking about topics that could come before this body. And so per sunshine rules, you can't both be there talking about a topic like that.
So not maybe to UAB, because there are one place to talk about that later. Yeah, Dean, yeah.
Okay, I was city councilman for the city of Fort Walton Beach, and we did have enterprise funds. We had one for water, sewer, wastewater, garbage, and golf course. We did have transfers going from those entities, those enterprise funds. The GRU is the enterprise fund, it to the general fund of the city. I was just trying to clarify some, maybe some of the questions you had.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I appreciate that.
What is the total general government annual amount of money that we for general government?
You mean the general fund operating budget? I think it's about $155 million.
155, and we're talking about 15 million here.
Talking about 15.3 million here. And that is, as I'm going to point out on the next slide, that is a significant reduction from what we've been providing. The number this year is 34.2 million. It's going to be 34. It's budgeted. It was budgeted prior to this to be 32.2 million in 24. So it's roughly about $17 million reduction.
And just to point, not that long ago, the general fund transfer was covering, I believe, 40% of the city budget. So it's actually come down considerably to 25%, and now we're down to 10.
Yeah, I think the general government budget's gone up and the transfer amount has gone, both of those things have occurred.
And anyone else before we move on to the next slide?
So it's going down to 15, which is 17.
Less than it was budgeted to be.
Right. Okay.
Is it turned on?
Turn it on.
Yeah.
So this is the math behind that. The other piece that we talked with the general policy committee about was the fact that that other finding from the water bill about the debt level. We back in October, as part of the debt management policy amendment, we set a 70% target for capitalization rate for the utility. At that time, we didn't set a time frame in which we would reach that. As part of this, part of the change we were making to the transfer, we adopted a 10-year time frame. So to reach that 70% cap rate within 10 years, we'll have to affect a $315 million reduction in GRU's net debt. So that's how this change to 15.3 plays into this. Over that 10-year period, you know, with a $15.3 million general fund transfer or general government services contribution. Over that decade, that'll be a cumulative reduction of what's budgeted of just under $120 million. So that's $120 million less that we'll have to pay. It's a $120 million revenue hit to the general fund. We've got that $120 million. We are also going to contribute toward that, the components of that $315 million. About $76 million in excess revenue that we project will be generated from the recurring base rate increases in electric and wastewater that were put in place back in 22 that go through 27. It requires GRU to come up with cumulatively a little over $28 million in budget cuts over that next decade. When you combine those three pieces with the $91 million in organic reduction that we're projecting, which simply means what we're already scheduled to amortize in principal over that period versus what we're going to, what we project we're going to issue, that makes up the $315 million that will take us down to, in theory, take us down to the 70% capitalization target. Significant impact on the general fund, and it's going to require GRU to come up with the funds to get close to $30 million in budget cuts.
Good job.
The organic debt reduction through 2030,
That was already planned, is that what you mean?
No, that's what, if you look at what we did there is we looked at what we're already planning to pay on principal for issues that are in place now.
That's what I mean.
And then it also projects what we're going to issue over the next 10 years and what we plan to pay down on those new issuances.
that was under normal conditions. Okay.
The only thing it does not, or one of the big things it does not contemplate is the IRP. So future generation over the next 10 years is not included in that. So if, as we go through the IRP process, if that identifies a large investment in the next 10 years, we have to figure out how to incorporate that into this plan.
That, and there's no plant decommissioning in there.
One other question. How did the number 70% come up since the industry is 50%?
Yeah, so one of the reasons is because where we're starting.
Okay, all right.
To be real frank, I mean, so we're at, for is it Moody's that we're at 87 or Fitch. So for Fitch, we're at essentially 87%. And so we have this goal of 70 because frankly, it acknowledges where we're now. We've had the goal of 70. What we said is we're going to accelerate how to get to that goal. And we're going to accelerate that by getting there in the next decade, in the next 10 years.
Rather than 10 years, you're going to contract that time for?
No, we're on a path of much longer than 10 years, and we are accelerating it to 10 years. And to get to that 70% over the next 10 years, we have to reduce our net debt by $315 million.
The 70% itself was an aspirational stretch goal when we had it codified back in October. As you can see, that's a big reduction. This process, when we're looking at what we're doing with the general fund transfer in conjunction with addressing some of the things that Dave brought up, is what condensed it into 10 years. And that's going to be a difficult target to reach.
All right, anyone else? Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to you guys. I know this couldn't have been easy. I know these are hard decisions. Things that are happening rapidly, so. Yeah, I think it's well laid out, well done.
So the next topic we wanted to update was Mr. Hutchinson, if Kanzan can come up and give us an update on sort of the go live of the billing system. And then again, this was something that you all had brought up. If you have any questions for him, please jump in there. So, yeah, I think that's going to be best. Microphones.
Mr. Chair, Kenzan Hutchinson, Chief Customer Officer. I'm excited to be here today just to share how in April 3rd, we went live with our CIS project. And a lot of our employees spent many hours over the last 2 years to get us to that point. And so we had a pretty successful go live on April 3rd. And I want to mention as it relates to go live April 3rd and how we deem that as being successful. We were able to open up on that Monday, do our normal business transactions with our customers to serve them. Albeit may have taken us a little bit longer just because it's a newer system and we still had to navigate a few bugs out of the process. But overall, I'm extremely excited about the fact that we were able to go live and continue to do business as we have prior to. With that being said, of course, you know, whenever we go into a new system, it sometimes takes us a little bit longer to get things done. There's some back end things that we have to get resolved. And so there are some bugs that we're continuing to work out. And, you know, typically whenever you go live, it's slow up at the beginning and then it kind of dwindles down and you start seeing more efficiencies as we continue to utilize the software. So I am excited the fact that that has been in place and we have been able to identify small bugs. When I'm mentioning small bugs, I'm saying things like where someone may not have the access that they need, or some of the payments may show up in one code versus another code, and we're still trying to navigate a few of those things. But overall, we've been able to navigate those and get those things done and resolved pretty quickly. And so the fact that we went into a new system, and of course, we're excited about it. We have to be able to measure to say, well, you know, we spent this time, this money, this effort, and to get into a place of having a successful software. And so a couple of things I just wanted to bring to your attention as we're measuring this as a successful software implementation is one, our current training time is about 6 weeks to actually get a CSR in and teach them how to navigate in the system. And then we have them pretty much ready to hit the floor to serve our customers. We're expecting with this software to try to get it somewhere around 2 to 3 weeks, which is really good, which is almost cutting our training time in half. And to put that in context, I've never really went through the full training of our older system. And over the time that I've been here, I just learned GRU's lingo, processes and procedures and things like that. So I was actually able to go into the training and sit for like 2 hours, and literally I can sit down now and do move in, move out, turn on, turn off, the whole transfers of services. So really excited about that. Now I don't have to go to a rep to get those things done. I can actually do it myself. So I'm very excited about that. The other thing we're looking at as a successful software implementation is average handle time. So we're really trying to get our average handle time down. And our older system, it was a little convoluted to the point where you had to use multiple screens to navigate, to get things done for customers. Now we've consolidated a lot of those screens. And so at this point, over time, we'll see where our average handle time will constantly decrease. And so we're expecting that to be very impactful to our customers. Another thing that we've looking at as well from a successful software upgrade is the fact that we have a platform that we're able to do things like AMI and cut out some of the other softwares that we were using for reporting. And so those are some immediate things that we've been able to see within our software upgrade, and also just a system that's able to communicate more with our financials. There was a lot of manual processes in between, making sure that information gets from our CIS system to our FMIS system, which is our financial system. And so we were able to actually cut out some of that manual processes, be able to reconcile. And so a lot of those things have been really put in place for us to notify that, in fact, we have a successful software. And so I think one of the questions was, how are we measuring those things? We're measuring those things by those things that I just mentioned.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you for having a positive report. We could use one of those. So that's exciting. And also I do software development myself at times. I rolled out some new software to 2 people last week and they broke it immediately. So you guys are trying to, rebuild the cars you're driving down the highway. So I'm really pleased to hear how well that went.
I can tell you, rolling out something in SAP, Wasco, and it took a year to do. You call it, that is a good job.
Awesome. And I want to say also, I could not have done it without our folks. There are many, I call it hours, sweat, and tears that our employees spent just navigating business processes, documentations, pushing back for changing of processes. And I guess most may know this, but whenever you're used to doing something so long a certain way, it's sometimes challenging to change that process to do things different. So we had a lot of changing of processes from what we used to do to make it more industry standard, so we don't have issues when upgrades are necessary in the future. And so, as I say, I'm very pleased with our staff. We went to battle and they did a phenomenal job, and so I'm grateful to them for that.
Yep. Anyone else?
Is this an SAP system?
It is.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
So the only other topic I wanted to touch on was the IRP question that you raised earlier. So there is that conflict and with the sunshine laws and where both of you cannot be on there. What I will say is there will be information we're bringing back to this body. It's kind of an output from that stakeholder group. So this body will have a role in the process that is in addition to just that stakeholder group. So just want to kind of give you that information, but I think you all need to decide how you want to address that conflict and which of you two to stay on there because of that conflict. I don't know, Bianca, if there's anything you want to add as well, just from that. Okay.
So just to discuss it a little bit, I mean, the challenge we have, Teresa's on the board, but not a voting member. And so, but she's also representing the school, which is a very important, constituent. So I'm looking for feedback. I mean, my first response is, I think it would be important to have a voting UAB representative. It doesn't have to be me, but that causes a conflict. Based on what you were just saying, is that important for us to have that, or is enough stuff gonna come back to us that maybe that?
So this board is going to have a role in addition to that stakeholder. The stakeholder group's going to be meeting on a regular basis. We will absolutely provide updates on the IRP. We could have a regular standing update that has feedback from this group throughout the summer, and the rest of the year. I don't know if we want that to dominate all of our meetings and everything that were happening, but that could be. I wouldn't think that this group would meet as frequently as the stakeholder group is, but you will have a voice and a role, and you all can help define that. If you want that to be more active, that can be more active and on your all's agendas.
I think that, there are a number of people up here, and sure Jason also, that want to have an active role. So if there's an opportunity to have an active role. Okay.
So just for information, what is the school board of Alachua County your third or fourth largest customer? Or fifth?
And I'm not sure.
No.
I don't know.
I'm just putting that out there. So when you're talking about the future of, who's going to be affected, I don't know what number customer we are, but we're one of your larger customers. So I just want to put that information out there for everybody.
No, I appreciate that. The school board would need to be represented. I mean, the challenge is, I guess the question, I'm leaning towards saying, okay, I'll just back off, but unless you had someone else that could be, a representative for the school board effectively represent them instead of you.
So so I think that's an option. Does the school board want a different representative besides you on that stakeholder group? That would resolve it, or Barry stepping out. That's something.
But I couldn't be replaced by anybody.
Absolutely.
So it's a question. I mean, I'd like to just see if we just resolve it now. Be done. Is there anyone else you feel that can?
We already went through that, and I was elected as a representative for the school board.
Sure. No, I understand that you're, so but do you, I'm just asking your opinion, do you feel that there's someone else that could effectively represent the school board? I know you're in a little bit of a leading position.
Well,
It's
no.
okay to say no.
No.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, so based on that, I'll step off, because I think it's. If you've said, hey, I have someone who'd be great, you have other stuff to do, no problem, but if, I anticipated you would say.
It's a big deal for all the schools moving forward,
Understood. Okay,
how the future goes.
okay, well, we'll just resolve it that way. I just won't.
And the
Repeat
UAB will be
myself.
involved in it all
I was gonna
along.
say, so I think what we could do at the next meeting, you could talk about, we could talk about your involvement in the IRP and how frequently we want updates and how we want input into the process. And that could be a topic on our next meeting agenda and have our IRP folks here to talk about that.
What would you be telling the stakeholders you wouldn't be telling us?
So I think the idea with the stakeholders is you go through an education process. And so we could do the same. I think that's what I'm saying is we could kind of do the same thing, but you go through an education process of what an IRP is, what kind of generation we have, what are the different options. Then what you're getting is a lot of feedback from them also, and we could do the same thing with the UAB. What are the priorities? Is economics the number one priority? Is clean energy a priority? What are the weighted priorities? And we're collecting that feedback. And I think we could go through a lot of those same exercises with the UAB. And so at the next meeting, we could have our IRP team here to talk about what the role of the UAB is, and we could shape that at that time.
Well, if there's nothing else, I guess that's resolved. So I guess we'll move on to our.
Right, so our agenda item. So Karen Fiore is here. She is our rates and economic analysis manager. Is that right? All right. So she will be giving a presentation. This is part of our budget process. As you know, we've had some budget meetings already. This is one of those budget meetings to give overview of the forecasts of the sales, customers, and revenue, and look at what that looks like going forward. And so Karen, if you would give that presentation.
I'm sorry, if I can just jump in real quick, because I did something today that I forgot to tell you. I did the new, we're gonna have to change your budget calendar, the one that you all agreed on earlier. We had to revise the commission, so we revised yours as well. And the last slide on here will be that revised budget calendar for them to look at and say whether it's good for them or not.
So you don't have any, only thing to vote on at the end of this, is that what you're saying? Then you approve that new budget calendar?
Yeah.
Okay, so at the end, we'll have that budget calendar to approve it.
Good afternoon, Karen Fiore. As you can see from the slide, the same presentation was given to the commission yesterday by Todd. Each year, we forecast the number of customers, unit sales, and revenues in our water, wastewater, electric, and gas systems. We use that data and those forecasts to help with system planning, as well as regulatory reporting, such as our 10-year site plan. Today's presentation, I'm going to try to show how we use that data and those forecasts to project out our revenues, which is an essential piece to our annual budget. So we use economic, demographic, and climate data to develop the mathematical equation that exists, the relationship in our historical monthly billing. We use this through regression analysis, and this is done entirely in-house by our one and only Todd Camp, who I know you all know. Todd's approach is what's considered a bottom-up approach. So he starts with the customer number of customers and their usage. It rolls into sales by those classes, and then it's aggregated up to total sales by system. Todd uses decades worth of internal data that's been kept on our historic monthly billing, as well as peak demand load. He uses reputable external data that comes from the Bureau of Economic and Business Research through the University of Florida. They provide us with population and household population. He also uses S&P Global information that they produce on our income and employment. And Todd is also able to compile the heating degree days, the cooling degree days, and the amount of rainfall through the data that is provided to NOAA from the flight service station at the Gainesville Regional Airport. So here I'm going to go through an example of a forecast equation. This is a regression equation equation looking at water sales per customer. So the water sales per customer is your dependent variable. This is the effect. This is the value depends on the change in your independent variable. Here is the seasonal rainfall, which is March through May, and the price per 1,000 gallons. If you look up at the equation, the 10.3, that 10.3 represents the intercept term or the constant. This is where your regression line would cross the y-axis if no other factors were in place. So essentially it's saying that a customer would use 10,000 gallons per month. Moving on to the equation, it's stating that for every inch of rainfall during this seasonal rainfall period, a customer will use 0.04 less gallons. We know it's less because you see that negative coefficient in front of that 0.04. Further on into the equation, the price represents the overall delivered water price for any given year. So you take your total revenues divided by the total billed gallons and you adjust it for inflation. Todd uses fiscal year 2012 as his baseline for inflation. So again, we see a negative coefficient here. So it's telling us that as the price of the water increases, the consumption reduces by our customers. So higher price translates to lower sales. Now, if you look,
Sorry, what's the typical price per gallon now? So I can understand the magnitude.
I don't have that answer. I think it's 5 something.
So for water,
Yeah.
Okay, gallon.
tier, the first tier is like 245. Second tier is like 395, and the third tier is like 610 or 612. We got it.
Irrigation has a different number as well.
You have an irrigation meter, you start at the second tier.
I don't expect you to answer this question, but when you go back to your statistical guide, and this will go through all these things you see in all these regression analysis. What is the confidence limits around is plus or minus 5%, 10%, 20%?
Don't have the answer.
Huh?
I don't have the answer, but I will get you the answer.
That's an important issue.
We're looking at the actual versus the projected, it's pretty tight.
Huh?
Looking at actual versus projected, that's pretty tight.
Why has water usage gone down during that time period?
So as mentioned, as price goes up, the usage actually goes down. So that's one factor. When you have more efficient appliances, more water conservation, you're going to see that the usage will go down as well.
But this doesn't take that into account and has it tight. So it's either confounded or.
This is showing water sales per customer per month. So it's decreasing. Yes.
Is the price in inflation adjusted?
He uses fiscal year 2012 for his inflation base year.
And then it's inflation adjusted back and forth, backwards and forwards from it. Okay.
So if we look at the data here, your blue line is your actual data from fiscal year 1994 through 2022. And then your red line represents the equation projection. So you can see here that the model is actually explaining 93% of the variation in the historical data, which is extremely good, which obviously you're not going to see this in all of your models. And this is what's considered your adjusted R-square. The importance to show this.
That answers the question.
The other thing that I want to really stress on showing you this is that when Todd does his modeling and all of his forecasts, he's not simply just adding a percentage and inflation rate onto everything. This is what he does for all the systems and all of his forecasts and projections.
Teresa, do you have something you want to say?
So now I'm going to go through each of the systems, starting with the water system.
Not working on.
I remember what it was now. When you were talking about the 0.042, is that per kgal or gallon? I think you said gal, but I think meant
Takeout or?
Yeah.
Takeout, okay.
Was it? I figured it was.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll put a cut back on it.
That's a pretty sharp drop.
So member Crowe, as they're getting that set up, so both water and electric, you'll see similar drops. And water, as Karen kind of mentioned, you have this, what we call passive replacement. So the industry, both water and electric, you're replacing shower heads, you're replacing light bulbs, you're replacing things with more efficient appliances, whatever you're using. And so you see a pretty sharp reduction, and it's been across the industry, both in GRU and across the industry, that you see that reduction, driven a lot by that passive replacement. Water also has the additional tiered rates. So in 2005-06 time period, we started putting in tiered or conservation rates. So as you use more, you pay more. And it's the elasticity with cost. I mean, it's real. Like there's a signal, there's a response. And so you see that come down even more because of as those came in play.
I was just.
Also a behavioral response during and right after the recession, which it never fully picked back up to its prior rates. You've got price signals and you've got learned behavior that didn't happen in all of this.
And some of that because of the downward trend, I think is confounded with some of the changes in behavior and in the efficiencies.
Yep.
So I'm going to start with the water system, and you'll see this repeated for the other system, the same type of format as this graph. So the water system has 6 primary billing groups you see in the left column. We service 75,000 customers, and we distribute 7.1 kgals a year for a total of $37 million in revenue, which includes the surcharge. The monthly average usage. On the right axis in blue would be your residential, and on the left axis and on the right axis is in red is your non-residential. And Todd's showing us 2 years of his forecast. So you see 20 years of actual data and 20 years of forecasts over 2-year cycles. So last year's forecast and this year's forecast. And you can see that this year's forecast is slightly above last year. And again, the reason for this would be the price drives less consumption, and you have water conservation and efficient appliances. This is the number of customers in our water system.
I'll go back to that. Why is it non-residential history going up in the last by 2022? The graph is going up from. There's a simple answer.
Well, I think most of, and you're talking about the jump in 2022 itself.
Yes.
I think most of that's probably being driven by the fact that we made some structural changes to our rates there, and we went from billing 95% of water usage for non-residential to 100%. Change the billing.
COVID played some factor in there of people not going.
Because your residential history looks like it's.
What is the range of the data here from? It can't be going all the way back to 2013, or that wouldn't be the equation. It's got to be starting here, up here closer.
This is 2003.
Well, I'm saying if that's 2003 and you're looking at going forward with a line that looks like that, that doesn't make any sense. Not an regression analysis, because look at it, you're way up there at 9 and 8, these things, and then you flatten out. What I'm saying is usually in a regression analysis, in order to see a line that goes out like this.
I think what you're missing is from 2003 forward, that's actual. The regression line picks up going forward. But from 2003, that drop through 2019 is actual.
What I'm saying is, wherever you start this, it's probably around here. if you couldn't be using that data up there, this couldn't happen in a regression analysis. It can't happen.
Yeah, yes, absolutely it can, and it's
There's no way that can happen in a regression analysis.
It's based on the difference in behavior and the difference in what he's forecasting from that point forward. Like I said, you're looking at 15 years worth of actual data from 2003 to 2019, 2021. Regression analysis picks up from that point forward, and that's what he's got going forward based on what he sees.
What year did you started using it?
The regression analysis that he's working on now would have started around 2019, 2020.
All right, so he started using the data that he's using starts in 2019.
To build the regression analysis.
Okay,
That's
all right.
what I'm saying. Everything prior to that is actual data.
Okay, fine. That's all I asked is where did what you're using in the regression analysis, where did it start?
To have such flat out years, you've got to assume that you don't really have any changes. I mean, your tiers of pricing have to remain the same, or the overall cost of water has to remain the same, or no drought has to remain the same, whatever it is. Those conditions have to remain pretty much frozen.
There's no forecast or projection of structural changes to the rate structure. You're correct. That's based on what that structure looks like today.
You can tell Todd, we'd like to start forecasting rainfall for us. That's easy. Would be nice.
Well, what's interesting about that is, if for those of you who've seen Todd's forecasts before, they're almost annoyingly accurate.
Yes.
This shows one of the situations where he's very accurate. So again, you see the blue is your actuals and then his forecast. And you can see last year's forecast is right in line with this year's forecast. And it's 0.60% 10-year average annual growth here. This is looking at sales. So the product of the use per customer coupled with the number of customer gives your sale volumes. Compared to last year's forecast, slightly higher. This is driven by customer growth. So increased customer growth will increase sales over time. This slide shows all the revenues by category. 37 million annually in the water system. Your 2023 bar represents 5 months of actuals, so October through February actuals. And you can see, obviously, your residential is the largest portion of the water system here. This slide is showing 2 years of revenue projections in our water system. And again, the higher for the blue bars, which is 24, is due to higher sale volumes forecasted.
Now that includes sales to University of Florida, right? So if Florida grows the way it has been growing, you're seeing those numbers go up.
Talking about the campus?
Yeah.
Campus, yes.
Yeah.
Now, on water, we reduce the revenue, like, so we don't make the GFT from UF Water, and we discounted the distribution costs because they have their own distribution system, so it's.
But we're seeing those consumption numbers here under commercial, right?
Yes, it would be in there, but I will tell you, the UF water usage doesn't grow very much at all, It's very flat, as they've, between conservation and using reclaimed water, they've kept it very flat over many, many years.
This is the wastewater system where we have 4 primary billing segments there on the left. We serve 67,000 customers and we collect and treat 5 million K-gals a year. And our revenues at $45 million. You can see the reclaimed water on the bottom there. So this is a component of the wastewater, but it's kind of compares to more like what you see in the water system, because here, the water is treated and then, it goes through the meter through the customer, like you see through. The main users of the reclaimed water would be Hale Plantation, Oakmont, and Cobblefield. Similar to the water, same type of graph. On the left, your residential, on the right, your non-residential, showing 2 years of projections. The wastewater billing is based on metered water sales. And you can see that over the last 20 years have been a decline. The blue being your residential still is showing a slight decline. In the forecast there. And this is what Mark was saying earlier. The increase over last year's projection was due to the rate structure that changed in the wastewater system in fiscal year 22. So that's why you see a revised projection or forecast. Number of customers in our wastewater system, right on track the last 2 years, 10-year average annual growth at 0.64%. The water volumes, as mentioned a few slides ago, the structure implemented in 22 adjusted the forecast upward for this year. Looking at all the revenues within the wastewater, again, residential is your largest portion. And total revenues are $48 million. 2023 has their 5 months of actuals.
That doesn't look like there are any plans to increase reclaimed water sales.
Yeah.
I can address that a little bit. The expansion of the reclaimed water system to offset potable water use has essentially decreased rapidly. We're not expanding that system very much. Most of that water is now going to recharge, which is going to whether it's Sweetwater Wetlands or the new recharge wetland and off Parker Road. And the real benefit there is you don't have these reclaimed customers and you don't have that revenue, but that provides recharge of the Florida aquifer, which allows our consumptive use permit to continue to withdraw water from the Florida aquifer. It offsets that impact. And there are rules that are being put in place by the water management districts that we would have to pay for that offset in some way. And we're accomplishing that through the recharge wetland project.
This slide is showing last year's revenue projection to this year. This year is in blue, and you can see there's an uptick in this year. And that is due to fiscal year 23. There was a 5% rate increase coupled with that structural change that we talked about for fiscal year 22. And it's important to note that Todd's projections are current rates. So even though commission has tentatively approved the 5% increase for fiscal year 24, you're not seeing that here in Todd's projections. These are actual rates of today. So when it was implemented in 23, that's why you did not see that in the red bars. He's not forecasting any increases in his projections. That's done down the budget cycle when expenditures come into play and how much is needed to cover those expenditures.
That's exactly what I was going to say was that Todd does all his work downstream of price, because that's what allows us to determine based on the revenues that Todd projects at the current price level versus the expenditures that we see coming through our budget for the year, what that gap is going to be and what if any incremental revenue requirement is required to apply that year.
So on the first analysis you were showing with water, you were showing the impact of price on water use. Is there are there similar analyses, not that you have to show them to us, on these other products to show what the elasticity impact of pricing is?
I would say that's in all our systems, the price.
Talking about the initial formula that she was describing.
Well, there was the one for water, which said, hey, if the price goes up, you see.
That's applied in each one of the individual system forecasts.
So to make sure I understood what you said just a minute ago, there are planned increases in each of these systems and pricing that has not been plugged into these to say, oh, we expect to see a corresponding decrease in consumption based on the elasticity.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, no, he projects the usage based on the price as it sits at that point in time. He projects the revenues based on that particular price. We then contrast it with what we expect, or what the expenses are going to be. That's what generates that incremental piece.
Moving on to the natural gas system. The natural gas has 4 segments. We service 37 million customers and distribute 22 million therms per year and revenues totaling $16 million. This includes surcharges, but it does not include fuel or taxes. Something to note here in the natural gas system is that we have fewer than 2,000 non-residential customers, but they represent nearly 2/3 of the total volumes in the system. The UF Cogen here, this is strictly transportation. So UF purchases the fuel from Duke and we simply transport that fuel. So this is not part of our retail sales. That's why you're seeing it underneath the total there.
That's why the firms are so small. I mean, the cost, the revenue.
Yes.
Only the transport.
I was looking at it going, wow.
This slide is showing you similar to the other system, we're seeing a decline, average use. The forecast for the residential in blue, you can see is still being forecast to decline. However, your commercial is pretty much flat. The sales volume in the gas system is very seasonal compared to the other systems due to winter weather, fluctuations. And so the gas system actually reduces the winter volatility, of the electrical sales by being able to meet the heating loads for many of our customers. And Todd likes to point out, if you look at the 2010 spike, that was an example of an extremely cold winter.
So this is the average across all customers.
Yes.
So do you see the same? I can see residentially, commercially. Do you see the same spikes, or are they using that for, production of, and so they don't have the same spike?
Yeah. Mark had said for production.
So do they see a similar seasonal spike in commercial or not?
Yeah, you're seeing that here in the history, the 20 years in history here. You see the same spike, not as much as you see in the residential though. Number of customers in our gas system, 0.6 again in 10-year average growth. And both years forecasts were right on top of each other. Looking at gas system, let's skip a slide. Natural gas sales, slightly higher than last year's forecast. This is driven strictly by residential use per customer. This is an extremely flat system compared to our other system. It only has 0.31% 10-year average growth in this system. Now looking at all the segments together, 16 million annually should be in your residential. Again, these are just current rates. There's no increase in rates in these forecasts.
Going back, what is the percentage of residential as well versus non-residential? Residential or?
Yeah, so this shows you the breakout.
Okay.
But again, remember, it's very different, obviously, if you're looking at number of customers versus sales. Gas system, that's the most.
For informational purposes.
slide shows you very flat again in the gas system comparing last year's projection to this year's projection. There has been no base rate increases in our gas system since 2019. The electric system has 5 rate categories. We service 102 million or 1,000 customers, and we distribute 1.8 million megawatt hours yearly for $190 million annual revenue. And again, this includes surcharge, but no fuel or taxes. This slide is only showing you retail activity. So we're not showing you revenue from transmission that we provide to Clay or Alachua, and that's about $1 million a year, but we're not seeing them in this numbers, in these numbers.
It looks like there are only about 10 large band customers.
So there's 11 large power customers. Would you like me to read them?
Sure.
Yeah.
So GRU Kanappaha Water, North Florida Regional Medical Center, UF Waldo Road Wind Tunnel, UF Waldo Road Data Center, State of Florida Department of Children and Family Services, GRU South Energy Center, UF Health Shands Hospital South, Cyvance, GRU Murphy Water Treatment Plant, VA Medical Center, and Santa Fe College.
So it sounds like you're going, like, so the school board I would have thought would be in there, but you're doing it kind of account by account or.
I think it's because a lot of the school boards have separate accounts.
You have 101 accounts, but if you conglomerate them all into one.
Thank you.
For this slide, we're not combining residential and non-residential. Scott is showing you just residential on its own, and he's showing you also 3 years. And hopefully to show that the residential hovers around the 800 kilowatt per month. And then the red is this year's forecast. And you can see that large uptick in the outer years. And that is due to assuming that the adoption of EVs and EV charging.
Okay.
And we assume that the EV charging would take place in the residential home. So that's why you're seeing that large uptick.
So that's a significant change from last year's assumption, especially for us.
What's the percentage? You know, to the.
Forecast, this includes 4,000 or 40,000 EVs would be on the road within these 20 years. And currently it's like 1,500. So it's quite a big drop.
It's a pretty optimistic.
That is optimistic, because McKinsey Company thinks you're gonna triple, what do you call it, the grid by 2050. Triple.
Like by that standard, it'd be a very conservative assumption.
Huh?
But what you're saying, that's a very conservative assumption.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the whole industry is not sure how all this is gonna progress. I mean, this is, anytime you sit with other electric utilities, this discussion is, when is it gonna happen? How much is it gonna happen? Are we gonna be ready for it? The whole industry is we're really trying to address that and stay in front of it. And there are some utilities that are trying to accelerate this and get more EVs on the road. And so I think we're all watching, and just like everything else in the forecast, every year we're going to learn something that's going to be different next year based on what we learned the year before, and trying to stay up with it as it changes.
I mean, I can tell you, anecdotally, we're getting all kinds of calls. Can you come install an EV charger? I mean, the difference from 2 years ago to last month is wildly different. It's a lot.
Well, I think that's why you saw that, yeah, as you just mentioned, the uptick between what that EV forecast will look like last year and what it looks like this year.
Which is good for GRU.
Now this slide is showing you the non-residential usage for 3 years of forecast, and you can see that it's been pretty much flat, hovering around that 7,000 kilowatt hour. We are assuming that there'll be adoption of the EVs, but you're not seeing an aggressive like you did in the residential, because again, we're assuming that those charging stations will be at the residential homes. number of customers in our electric system. Slight growth over last year. We're at about 0.6% year average growth in our electric system. This is driven by population growth.
If I can look at those numbers, they're talking about going from 100 to 113 in the next.
Which are you on the population, the customer?
Don't tell them customers. Okay, so that seems like that was significant. Maybe it's just the scales different, significantly more than like than some of the other, like the water customers or.
0.6% growth, so I think it's pretty similar. This is customers, not sales.
Sure.
When you look at sales, it's kind of
I
flat.
think you just scaled a little differently.
So he uses the same population projection, so you're seeing that pattern in all of the systems. This is total retail energy requirement to serve all our customers. Again, that uptick you're seeing in this year's forecast is due to the adoption of the EVs.
Excuse me, would you?
So forecast is 0.57 per year.
Yes.
Okay.
Looking at revenues as a whole in this system, 200 million annual revenues. Unlike the other systems, you see non-residential being the largest share here. And as mentioned earlier, that transmission, that $1 million, you see on that very top sliver, it's like in a light blue. That's what that represents. And it's about $1 million annually. Looking at last year's revenue projections compared to this year, you see a slight increase here, and that is due to there was a 3% increase adopted in October of 2023. Looking at all non-fuel revenues per system, again, we see where electric is the largest system, but pretty flat overall. So it's actually 0.5% a year in revenue growth without rate. Here, that's the organic growth. And these were the dates that Robin had mentioned for your.
Those first 4 dates actually coincide with your meetings. The last 2 are where we'll need to decide, and if you can't decide tonight, it's okay. I can do a doodle poll later this week and send those dates out to you so you can check your calendars and come to a consensus that way.
You say that the first 4 are our regular.
Yes, sir. And then those last 2, those would have to be on dates that are not your meetings.
So just to see if we can just resolve it quickly, I'm looking that the August 1st and August 8th are on Tuesdays, which is kind of a date we normally meet on, where the others are Monday, Wednesday, which are not our normal meeting dates. Do people prefer to the Tuesday date, or do people have a preference?
They're changing when I'll get confused.
I like some dates where it doesn't rain.
It's hard to talk about. Yeah, he could.
Is everyone good with the 1st and the 8th?
First and the 8th. Okay.
So that's really it. If there aren't any other questions, that is, that's the forecast presentation. And on the 11th, we'll be coming back to the UAV with some of the budget reductions to meet some of the goals that Mark showed with the $28 million reduction in expenses and our path forward for our budget this coming year.
Yeah, I just want to recognize the challenge, if I'm sure.
Yes.
I've got a question. We started talking about the $15 million that could be put into debt reduction each year. Has the city commission formally signed off on that?
So the city commission, Mr. Chair, the city commission approved that on April 13th. We are going back on May 4th with a resolution. The concept of it, we're going back to the city commission on May 4th with a that puts that into a resolution with that language for approval. But the intent is that, yeah, they would approve that on May 4th officially.
So it's sort of approved.
Yeah, I mean, it's approved in concept and gave the city manager and the general manager gave us direction to move forward to do our budgets. But it's more formalized in a resolution.
That's a big bite.
And it's a big commitment for the utility to have all of that, that reduction to go toward debt and have actually reducing that debt more rapidly than we have historically.
We'll get into the IRP later, but in the last IRP, we showed some decommissioning occurring during this time period. I don't know how you correlate what you said about those budgets having no decommissioning and having the last IRP showing, I don't know, 2 or 3 or whatever it was.
And so when we go through the IRP process, we'll have to contemplate that decommissioning. We'll have to do that in this IRP. It's currently not in our budget right now.
That's what you said earlier. Somehow there's a discrepancy there.
So I mean, we're through the IRP process, we're going to identify what we need to put in there, and then that will be in our 10-year plan. We don't know what it is at this point, so we can't put that in our budget.
I planned that for the next 10 years, my car's not going to need any maintenance whatsoever.
So no, that's not what we're saying. We're saying we have to know what that is, and the IRP process is going to identify
But
that.
they have identified that they recognized and that they have not included that last point.
Yep.
We'll have a much better handle on what that number needs to be once that IRP process is completed. It would have been primarily speculation to build that into a plan at this point, but we acknowledged and we were very transparent with the commission as we were with all that the numbers in the plan that we put together didn't include the developments, but as we work through them, we'd have to modify and adapt what we're doing to take that into account. We haven't pretended to anybody that 70% capitalization rate is going to be easy to make out, even irrespective of changes that'll come our way through the IRP or through decommissioning. That's going to be a difficult challenge to meet either way.
Yeah, we can, as the UAB, decide whether we want to put forth a recommendation on that or not. I don't know if anyone, we have to one way or the other. If anyone feels so inclined, I would accept the motion. If someone wants to. No pressure.
What, I'm sorry, what motion you had?
I'm asking if anyone wants to make a motion in relative to what the city commission could be voting on, whether they've already initially voted, but they're going to vote again on whether to move forward with GRU staff's recommendation for the EFT plan.
Yeah, so let me just speak into that. We did not bring that because it's a general fund transfer. It's related to general government. We did not bring that to the UAB for direction. We went to the city commission and got that approval through that process. So we're not anticipating any action or recommendation from the UAB.
And I'm not pressuring. I mean, and in general, over the past years I've been on this board, I have resisted making GFT recommendations because it's very easy for us to recommend things. We're not the ones who have to fire people, reduce services, whatever happens. So I resisted that, but if someone just want to throw it out there, if someone feels so inclined, they're welcome to bring it up.
Is there a date set for that?
So the April 13th, they approved it. May 4th, we're taking a resolution to formalize
May
that.
4th to be dealt with.
Can we get a copy of that slide?
Is that in the backup?
That very first slide when you went down, you were talking about.
Yeah, we can send that out.
Yes, it's on the back. That's the least, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think I get the feeling that the current city commission under the current circumstances are on a different path than formerly, and I don't think they need a whole lot of pushing from us at this point. To, make wise decisions.
Sure. All right, if we're ready to move on, we are on to public comment. Anyone from the public? Comment?
Not like this. And I don't have my eye on it, or. Yeah, keep an eye on me.
Hi, Nancy Darren. First of all, I just want to take my hat off and my appreciation to GRU and the staff and to the UAB joint meeting that occurred last week. Thank you, UAB, for making sure we had that. I wish I could have been there. But what you're have been forced into is just appalling, and it's wrong. And I admire your grace and your efforts to work with it, even though how much it disrupts so many years of careful planning, good, really prudent planning. And I've said before, I've been a financial coach for a while. Debt is the past, and you have to balance that with the present and the future. And if we starve ourselves in the present and the future, and you just said, anything extra that doesn't go to general government is going to the past, to debt, in a very compressed time frame, in a very short time of making that huge drop. And that's not financially prudent of how to do it. So munis are not IOUs. The GFT for us, especially with our low tax base, captures the non-taxable entities. I have so many questions around the whole formula, because our whole customer service territory, to just restrict everything to the city when there's really no way to make stuff up because we don't have a tax base, and the GFT was our substitute for a tax base for all these giant non-taxable entities that just got read off, right? It's what happened in Vero Beach when the city got compressed and they cut the county out, and it went to FP&L. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, I hope that there are ways to that in the next year or two that we can somehow mitigate this and stretch that time frame or make changes that do allow a very solid plan to go forward with the new IRP. This all pointed out to me, my last thing here, can I say one more thing? For years before you were in here, Mr. Cunningham, I've talked about rate structures, and we could see so clearly here, 2007 and on, things plummet, the usage and the revenues plummet and go flat because we value conservation, efficiency, and good management and all the other stuff. And so GRU has been burdened for years by being an incredibly astute and moving in the direction we need to move very well, but you're being punished because our whole rate structure is you got to burn more to earn more. You got to grow and grow and grow, and that's the only way to make it work. So all these different rate structures that are being looked at all over, how do we build in reliability and service in a much broader sense so that we're not penalized for doing the right thing going forward? So it's just, again, I just am horrified that here we are on the cusp of so much more good opportunity, that we have the most incredible utility, one of the top in the whole entire United States, and you're being you're being tied. So anyway, I hope to participate in trying to help figure out different rate structures and different ways to move forward that take the pressure off looking only at traditional structures, because that model is on a death spiral and we all know it. And thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Right, hearing none else, any members have any general comments they would like to make at this moment? Hearing none, next meeting date, May 11th. With that, we will adjourn.